the mission was collapsing. 26 Navy SEALs were pinned down in Kunar Valley, eastern Afghanistan, surrounded by over 230 insurgents closing in from every ridge. Radio jammed. No air support. No extraction window. And yet in the chaos, one voice quietly broke the silence. I have visual. It belonged to Lieutenant Arius Sullivan, the soft-spoken recon sniper everyone dismissed as too quiet to survive combat. No one knew she had climbed the impossible cliff route above them. No one knew she had the perfect angle. But the next 47 minutes would turn her into a legend. The wind howled through the narrow gorge like a wounded animal carrying with it the acrid smell of cordite and burning metal. 26 Navy SEALs were pressed into a rocky depression, barely 60 meters wide, their tactical formation shattered by concentrated fire from 3 directions. Commander Jake Harrison pressed himself against the jagged stone, his tactical vest torn from a near-miss RPG strike. Blood traced down his temple from a shrapnel cut. Around him, his team fought with the precision of men who knew they were living on borrowed time. Tangos closing from ridge, East Lieutenant Marcus Chen shouted over the din, his rifle barrel already glowing red from sustained fire. 230 advancing in pairs. West Flank's worst petty officer, First Class Devin Richards, added his voice tight. They've got our range dialed. Every time we move, they adjust. Harrison checked his tactical display, the GPS overlay showing exactly what he didn't want to see. Red hostile markers formed a tightening noose around their position. 230 insurgents, maybe more. They'd walked straight into a kill zone so perfectly designed it could have been lifted from a tactical warfare manual. The ambush had been masterful. What started as a straightforward target acquisition mission in the village of Hadara had turned into a nightmare. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was moving through the valley. Standard operation: insert quietly establish observation call and support if needed. Instead, the enemy had been waiting. They'd allowed the SAAL team to penetrate deep into the valley before springing the trap. Mortar fire had driven them into this gorge, and once inside, the enemy had activated signal jammers that turned their advanced communications equipment into useless weight. Radio still dead Chief Petty Officer Nathan Brooks reported working frantically with the comm equipment, getting nothing but static on all frequencies. They've got military-grade jammers positioned somewhere above us. Another RPG streaked overhead, impacting the cliff face 50 meters behind them. Loose rock rained down and someone cried out as a fist-sized stone struck his shoulder. Harrison did the math he'd been avoiding. Ammunition expenditure rate versus remaining supply. Casualty rate versus combat effectiveness. Time until the enemy completed their encirclement versus realistic extraction scenarios. Every calculation ended the same way. Commander Sergeant First Class Tyler Morrison said quietly, appearing at Harrison's shoulder. The senior enlisted man's face was grim. The men know. Harrison nodded slowly. Morrison was right. These were SEALs among the most elite warriors on the planet. They could read a tactical situation as clearly as he could. They knew they weren't getting out of this gorge alive. 30 minutes, Harrison said, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. Maybe less. Once they complete the encirclement, they'll pour fire from all sides simultaneously. We won't be able to return effective fire. Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Foster slumped against the rock wall nearby, applying pressure to a leg wound that was bleeding through his tactical pants. His face had gone pale, lips pressed thin against the pain. Medical specialist Angela Torres worked on him with steady hands, despite the chaos, but her eyes met Harrison's briefly. The look said everything. Foster needed a medevac. He needed it an hour ago. The wound wasn't immediately fatal, but without proper treatment, soon he'd go into shock. And he wasn't the only one. 3 other SEALs were carrying injuries, ranging from serious to critical. Fighting men with multiple injuries, low on ammunition, trapped in a kill zone. Harrison looked at the faces of his team. Men he'd trained with. Men he'd led through a dozen successful operations. Men who deserved better than dying in this godforsaken gorge because their commander had led them into a perfectly laid trap. Sir Chen called out, "They're moving up the south draw. Looks like a flanking element, maybe 20 combatants." Harrison raised his rifle and began acquiring targets. Around him, the SEALs adjusted their defensive positions with the fluid efficiency of countless training hours. They would make the enemy pay for every meter of ground. They would fight until the last magazine ran dry. But they all knew how this ended. The wind shifted, carrying smoke down into the gorge, stinging eyes and scratching throats. In the distance, barely audible over the gunfire, Harrison heard the distinctive thump of more mortar rounds being launched. This was it. This was how it ended. 800 meters away and 400 meters above the killing zone, Lieutenant Aria Sullivan moved through the darkness like smoke through trees. She'd grown up in Sitka, Alaska, where winter lasted 8 months, and silence was a survival skill. Her grandfather, William Sullivan, had been a wilderness guide who taught her that the forest revealed its secrets only to those patient enough to listen. "Don't let them hear your footsteps, little one," he'd told her on countless hunts through the snow-laden spruce forests. "The best hunter is the one the prey never knows exists." Those lessons had carried her through 10 years in the military, through ranger school, through specialized sniper training, through deployment after deployment. But they'd never quite been enough to earn her respect from the men she served alongside. Too small. Too quiet. Too forgettable. At 5'6" and 128 pounds, Aria didn't fit the physical profile most people associated with military snipers. She didn't have the loud confidence, the swagger, the presence that seemed to come naturally to so many operators. In briefing rooms, officers looked past her. In training exercises, she was often the last one picked for teams. The nickname had started during her first deployment, "Ghost Girl," said with a smirk by Lieutenant Sam Patterson, who thought himself clever. "You're so quiet, Sullivan, I forget you're even here." The name stuck. What was meant as mockery became her identity. The woman no one remembered. The sniper no one trusted with critical shots. She'd been assigned to reconnaissance and observation, important work, but not the primary sniper role she'd trained for. While male snipers with half her qualification scores were given priority positions, Aria watched from distance through spotting scopes, calling corrections for others to execute. But what her detractors didn't know, what they'd never bothered to observe, was that Aria Sullivan possessed a rare combination of skills that made her uniquely dangerous. She could shoot. Not just competently, but with an almost supernatural consistency. On the range, she routinely outscored operators with twice her experience. Her cold bore shots, that critical first round fired from a clean barrel, were legendary among the few instructors who paid attention. She could climb. Those years in Alaska, following her grandfather up frozen waterfalls and ice-sheathed cliff faces, had given her mountaineering skills that surpassed most tactical operators. She understood rock, understood ice, understood how to find purchase where others saw only impossibility. And she could read terrain. One glance at a topographical map, and Aria could visualize the landscape in 3 dimensions, could identify firing positions and approach routes that others missed entirely. These skills had kept her alive through 4 deployments. They'd made her an exceptional reconnaissance asset. But they'd never quite been enough to overcome the casual dismissal she faced from her peers. Until tonight. Tonight, those skills would be the difference between 26 flag-draped coffins and 26 warriors going home alive. The mission brief had seemed straightforward 3 days ago at Forward Operating Base Chapman. We've got solid intelligence on Khalid Marwan, Major Bradley Thompson had explained, pointing at satellite imagery of Hadara village. He's moving through Kunar province, likely heading for the Pakistani border. This is our window. Marwan was a high-value target, a logistics coordinator responsible for moving weapons and fighters across the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Taking him out would disrupt insurgent operations for months. The plan: insert ASAAL platoon, establish observation positions overlooking likely transit routes, confirm Marwan's presence, then either capture or eliminate depending on tactical circumstances. Standard counterinsurgency work. The kind of operation these teams had executed hundreds of times. Arya had been assigned to the reconnaissance element positioned 300 meters behind the main force, with orders to provide overwatch and report enemy movement. The insertion went smoothly. 2 Chinook helicopters dropped them 12 kilometers from the target area under cover of darkness. They moved through rough terrain for 6 hours, reaching their initial positions just before dawn. Hadara village appeared quiet. Too quiet, Arya had thought, studying the compound through her spotting scope. She saw normal village activity: women carrying water, children playing in dusty streets, men gathered outside the mosque, but something felt wrong. Command Recon 2, she'd radioed. Village patterns feel orchestrated. Recommend enhanced surveillance before advance. Recon 2 command came the dismissive reply from Captain Vincent Howard, the mission's tactical coordinator. Your assessment is noted. Maintain current position. Command out. Translation: stay in your lane, Sullivan. The SEAL element advanced into the valley, moving with tactical precision through the boulder-strewn terrain. Arya tracked their progress, her unease growing with each passing minute. Then she saw it. A flash of reflected sunlight from a ridge position that should have been empty. Then another from a different angle. And another. Command Recon 2. I have multiple possible hostile positions on the high ground. Recommend immediate halt and reassessment. Recon 2 command. We have no confirmed hostiles. Do not clutter the command net with speculation. Command out. Arya bit back her frustration. Through her scope, she watched the SEAL element continue deeper into the valley, following a natural draw between 2 rocky ridges. The terrain funneled them inexorably toward a narrow gorge. And then the world exploded. The first mortar rounds impacted with devastating precision, bracketing the SEAL formation. Machine gun fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously, perfectly coordinated, perfectly aimed. The SEALs immediately took defensive positions, returning fire, but they were caught in an expertly designed kill zone. More mortar fire forcing them back, driving them deeper into the gorge. Arya saw the tactical genius of it, even as horror gripped her chest. The enemy wasn't trying to kill them immediately. They were herding them, forcing them into an ever-tighter space where weight of numbers would eventually overwhelm even the most skilled operators. All units command, we are in contact, heavy fire from multiple positions. Harrison's voice came through the radio, tight with controlled urgency. Requesting immediate. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. Arya's radio filled with static and then went completely dead. Signal jammers. The enemy had activated military-grade electronic warfare equipment, cutting off all communications. She was alone. The SEA element was trapped and dying, and no one could hear her calls for help. Arya's hands trembled as she lowered her rifle. Through the scope, she could see muzzle flashes from the gorge as the trapped SEALs fought desperately. She could see enemy fighters moving into positions on the surrounding ridges, tightening the noose. She pulled out her tactical map, spreading it across the rocks in front of her. Her finger traced the contour lines following the terrain features. The gorge was a death trap, steep walls on 3 sides, only one exit, and the enemy controlled every approach. But there. Her finger stopped on a thin line of cliffs, designated Cliff Formation 17B. Impossibly steep, rated as non-traversable on the military terrain analysis. Except Arya had climbed worse in Alaska. Her eyes traced the route upward. If she could reach the top of 17B, she would have clear sight lines into the entire kill zone. She would be above the enemy positions with unobstructed angles on their fighting positions. It was a suicide climb. The slope exceeded 60 degrees in multiple sections. The rock face would be loose shale and sandstone treacherous, even in daylight with proper equipment. In darkness, with only the gear on her back, the odds of successfully completing the climb were maybe 1 in 5. But the odds of those 26 SEALs surviving without intervention were 0. Arya methodically stripped her pack down to essentials. Water. Ammunition. She counted 14 spare rounds for her M110 rifle. Minimal climbing gear. Everything else got left behind. She checked her rifle one last time, then began the climb that should have killed her. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, "If you're going to take the shot, make it count. Make it mean something." The rock face rose before her, like a wall of shadow nearly vertical, in places crumbling and treacherous everywhere. Arya tested the first handhold, felt it shift under her weight, and moved to another. The wind had picked up as darkness deepened, gusting down from the peaks at speeds that threatened to tear her from the cliff. Every gust brought sand and grit that stung exposed skin and made her eyes water behind her protective glasses. She climbed methodically using techniques learned in Alaska's Chugach Range. Weight on the legs. 3 points of contact always. Test every hold before committing. Read the rock by feel as much as by sight. 30 meters up her hand closed on what looked like solid stone. It crumbled instantly, sending a shower of loose shale rattling down the cliff face. Arya's body swung outward, suspended by one handhold, and her feet scrambling for purchase. For 3 terrifying seconds, she thought she was falling. Her right foot found a tiny ledge. She pressed down, testing it, then shifted her weight. It held. Her fingers found a crack in the rock face and wedged themselves in. Breathing hard, she steadied herself and continued upward. The tactical situation was deteriorating with every minute she spent climbing. Through breaks in the cliff, she could see muzzle flashes from the gorge below, flickering orange sparks in the darkness. The volume of fire told her the SEALs were still fighting, but for how much longer? 60 meters up the cliff face became nearly smooth, offering almost no handholds. Arya traversed, left moving along a narrow ledge barely wider than her boot. Her fingers traced along the rock, seeking any irregularity that could support her weight. The ledge ended at a vertical crack, running up the cliff face like a lightning bolt. It was barely wide enough to get her fingers inside, but it was the only route up. Arya wedged her hands into the crack, placed her feet against the rock face on either side, and began chimmying upward. Her shoulders screamed with effort. The crack was rough and sharp, tearing at her gloves, threatening to shred the skin beneath. But she climbed meter by agonizing meter until the crack finally widened into a climbable chimney. 90 meters up, she found a natural cave barely deep enough to provide shelter but sufficient to catch her breath. She pressed herself into the darkness, lungs heaving, arms trembling with exhaustion. Below, the gunfire continued. Time was running out. The final section nearly killed her. The rock transitioned from sandstone to loose shale, every handhold potentially fatal. Arya moved with extreme caution, testing each hold multiple times before committing her weight. But caution could only do so much when the rock itself was fundamentally unstable. She was 120 meters up, perhaps 15 meters from the summit ridge, when the entire section of cliff beneath her feet gave way. The sensation of falling was oddly peaceful for the first fraction of a second, a moment of weightlessness, of release from the agonizing effort of climbing. Then, survival instinct kicked in with electric intensity. Her right hand shot out, fingers clawing for anything solid. They caught on a small protrusion, maybe the size of a door handle, barely sufficient to arrest her fall. Her shoulder socket screamed as her full body weight suddenly loaded onto that single point. Her legs swung free below her, kicking desperately for purchase. The rock under her hand began to crack. She could hear it, a sound like glass breaking in slow motion. In seconds, it would give way entirely. Arya swung her left hand up, searching desperately. Her fingers found another hold. She pulled, taking some weight off the failing right-hand grip. Her right foot found a tiny ledge. She pushed up. The rock under her right hand shattered completely, but by then she'd already shifted her weight. She was moving upward, finding new holds driven by pure adrenaline and the certain knowledge that stopping meant falling 120 meters onto jagged rocks. 10 minutes later, 10 minutes that felt like hours, Arya pulled herself over the summit ridge of cliff formation 17B and collapsed onto solid ground. She allowed herself 30 seconds of trembling relief. Then she crawled to the edge and looked down into the valley below. The entire battlefield spread out beneath her like a tactical map come to life. The gorge where the seals were trapped, the enemy positions on the surrounding ridges, the machine gun nests, the mortar teams. Every target clearly visible. Arya pulled her rifle forward and began setting up her shooting position between two large rocks that would shield her silhouette. Her hands moved through the familiar routine despite their trembling. Bipod deployed. Range card prepared. Wind flags observed. Distance to targets estimated. She chambered around and settled in behind the scope. Through the magnified optic, she could see individual enemy fighters moving between positions, confident in their tactical superiority. They had no idea death was watching from above. Arya's finger touched the trigger, lightly feeling the familiar resistance. She took a slow breath, released half of it, and began identifying her targets in order of priority. The next 47 minutes would determine whether she was remembered as a hero or forgotten as a name on a casualty report. She whispered to herself almost too quietly to hear over the wind make it count. Target 1 materialized in her scope with crystalline clarity, an enemy sniper positioned on the eastern ridge, systematically firing into the trapped SEAL position. He was good. Disciplined. Taking careful shots, making each round count. He probably already wounded or killed multiple SEALs. Arya calculated the geometry. Range 847 meters. Wind gusting from the northwest at approximately 15 kilometers per hour, but swirling unpredictably in the valley below. Temperature cooling as night deepened, affecting bullet trajectory. Target elevated roughly 40 meters above her position, requiring a negative elevation adjustment. Her grandfather's voice, "The first shot is the most important. It tells everyone where you are and what you can do." She controlled her breathing, waiting for the space between heartbeats. The crosshairs settled on the enemy sniper's center mass. She pressed the trigger. The M110 bucked against her shoulder. The suppressor reduced the muzzle signature but couldn't eliminate it entirely. Through the scope, she saw the enemy sniper jerk backward and collapse behind the rocks. One down. Before anyone could react, Arya traversed her rifle, left acquiring target 2, a man in tactical gear gesturing commands to a squad of fighters. Squad leader, possibly platoon commander. He stood partially exposed, confident that he was outside effective range of the trapped SEALs. Range 921 meters. Wind had shifted slightly. She adjusted her hold, pressed the trigger. The commander dropped like a puppet with cut strings. 2 down. Now the enemy knew something had changed. She could see fighters scrambling, looking around wildly, trying to determine where the shots had come from. The angle was wrong for fire from the gorge, but there was nothing above them. The cliffs were unclimbable. Except they weren't. Arya shifted position, slightly moving 3 meters to her left to change her firing angle. The rocks that sheltered her also created multiple shooting ports. She could fire from several positions without significantly altering her silhouette. Target 3 machine gun crew on the western ridge, pouring sustained fire into the SEAL position. 2 men operating the weapon, 1 feeding ammunition. The gunner was partially concealed behind sandbags, but his upper torso was visible. Range, 793 meters. Easier shot, no elevation complications. Arya placed the crosshairs and fired. The gunner slumped forward. The ammunition handler grabbed for the weapon, trying to maintain fire. Arya chambered another round and fired again. The handler collapsed across the machine gun. 4 down. The tactical situation was shifting. In the gorge below, she could see the SEALs adjusting their defensive posture, recognizing that pressure from one direction had suddenly eased. They were using the momentary respite to redistribute ammunition and reposition wounded. But the enemy was numerous and well-trained. Initial confusion was giving way to tactical adaptation. She saw fighters moving to covered positions, exposing themselves less. Heard shouted commands echoing across the valley. They were looking for her. Arya selected her next targets with ruthless efficiency. Not the obvious threats, but the force multipliers. The men carrying radios who were coordinating the assault. The fighters carrying RPGs who could destroy defensive positions with single shots. The experienced operators she could identify by their movement and positioning. Shots 5 through 10 came in rapid succession, each carefully aimed despite the speed. An RPG gunner preparing to fire. A radio operator calling in their position. A squad leader rallying fighters for an assault. Another machine gun crew. 2 spotters trying to locate her position. 10 rounds fired. 10 enemy fighters neutralized. And the tactical balance in the gorge below was beginning to shift. Commander Harrison crouched behind a boulder, changing magazines on his rifle. The pressure from the eastern ridge had inexplicably eased. Machine gun fire that had been keeping his team pinned for the last 20 minutes had suddenly stopped. "What the hell is happening?" Lieutenant Chen shouted over the diminishing gunfire. Harrison had no answer. He'd been preparing to lead one final desperate breakout attempt, a last-ditch effort to take some of the enemy with them before being overrun. But now, someone shooting at them, Sergeant Morrison said, disbelief evident in his voice. Someone with serious skills. From where Harrison demanded, "We're the only friendly forces in this valley." Morrison pointed upward toward the cliffs. "Has to be from up there. The angle's all wrong for ground-level fire." Harrison looked up at cliff formation 17B, its sheer face barely visible in the darkness. "That's impossible. Nobody could climb that." But even as he said it, another enemy fighter on the western ridge suddenly dropped, the distinctive crack of a precision rifle shot echoing across the valley. "Impossible or not," Chen said quietly, "somebody just did." Arya had fired 15 rounds when she saw them coming. 3 fighters detached from the main force and began climbing the southern approach to her position. They moved with military precision, using cover effectively, advancing in tactical bounds. These weren't ordinary insurgents. They were trained soldiers who'd identified her general location and were coming to eliminate her. She had perhaps 7 minutes before they reached her position. 7 minutes to decide, stay and fight, or relocate and maintain her advantage. The tactical calculus was simple. If she stayed, she might eliminate these 3 threats, but would give away her exact position to the remaining enemy force. They would concentrate fire on her location, and eventually someone would get lucky. If she relocated, she could continue engaging targets while remaining hidden. But moving meant exposing herself, meant potentially losing this perfect shooting position. Arya glanced down at the gorge. The SEALs had used the reduced pressure to improve their defensive positions, but they were still pinned down, still taking casualties. They needed more time. She shifted her rifle, acquiring the lead climber. Range 412 meters and closing. He was good using available cover, keeping low, minimizing exposure. But he'd made one critical mistake. He was climbing during a full moon, and the moonlight reflected off the metal parts of his rifle. Arya placed the crosshairs on the glint of metal, waited for him to pause between movements, and pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The climber tumbled backward, rolling 30 meters down the slope before stopping against a boulder. The two remaining climbers immediately dove for cover. Now they knew she'd seen them. The hunt had become mutual. Arya grabbed her gear and moved. She relocated 40 meters along the ridgeline, moving quickly but carefully, staying below the ridgeline to avoid silhouetting herself against the sky. She found a new position between two large rocks with a slightly different angle on the valley. Through her scope, she saw the two remaining climbers advancing more cautiously. They'd learned. They moved only when shadows provided cover. Used terrain effectively presented minimal target profiles. But they were still coming. Arya ignored them for the moment and returned her attention to the main battle. The enemy was regrouping, preparing for a final assault on the SEAL position. She could see fighters gathering in a ravine, maybe 50 men consolidating for a coordinated push. She began servicing targets. Shot 16, a fighter carrying what looked like a man-portable mortar system. Shot 17, another radio operator. Shot 18, a fighter setting up a heavy machine gun position. Behind her, close enough to hear now, came the scrape of boots on rock. The climbers had split up, attempting to approach from two directions simultaneously. Smart and dangerous. Arya spun, transitioning from her precision rifle to her sidearm in one smooth motion. The first climber emerged from behind a rock formation 12 meters away, his own rifle rising. She fired 3 times. Center mass. He dropped. Movement to her left. Arya threw herself sideways, rolling behind cover as bullets sparked off the rocks where she'd been lying. She came up in a crouch, sidearm extended and engaged through a gap in the rocks. 4 shots. The second climber fell. Silence. Just the wind and the distant gunfire from below. Arya quickly checked for additional threats, found none, and returned to her rifle. She'd been out of position for perhaps 90 seconds. In that time, the enemy assault on the gorge had begun in earnest. Fighters were advancing down the ravines on both sides, supported by heavy fire from the ridges. The SEALs were being overrun. No time for careful target selection now. Arya began firing as fast as she could acquire targets. Shot 19. Shot 20. 21. 22. Each round carefully aimed but delivered with desperate speed. Fighters fell. The assault wavered. Confused shouts echoed across the valley as insurgents suddenly found themselves taking precision fire from an impossible angle. The advance stalled, then broke as fighters dove for cover. Arya's magazine ran dry. She dropped it, slammed in a fresh one, and continued firing. She was burning through ammunition now, but the SEALs needed time. Every second she could buy them was another second for reinforcements to arrive, for communications to be restored, for anything to change the tactical equation. Shot 28. struck an RPG gunner in the act of firing. His round went wild, impacting harmlessly on the cliff face. Shot 29 eliminated a squad leader trying to rally his fighters. Shot 30 took down a heavy weapons specialist setting up a machine gun. And then finally she saw him. The enemy commander stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, surrounded by several bodyguards. He was gesturing emphatically, shouting orders, trying to regain control of the deteriorating tactical situation. Arya estimated the range. 147 meters. Long shot. Very long shot. In darkness. With swirling winds and an elevated target. She settled into her shooting position, forcing her breathing to slow, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This was the shot that mattered. Kill the commander and the enemy force might break entirely. Miss, and they'd rally for one final overwhelming push. The wind gusted hard from the northwest. She waited for it to ease. Through the scope, she watched the commander's gestures, timing his movements, looking for a pattern. He was animated, emphatic, moving constantly. Except there. Every 15 seconds or so, he paused to listen to reports from his subordinates. During those pauses, he stood relatively still for perhaps 2 seconds. Arya waited. Controlled her breathing. Felt the wind on her face. The commander gestured sharply, then paused to listen to a fighter reporting. She placed the crosshairs high and right of center mass, compensating for distance, wind, and the downward angle. Her finger took up the trigger slack. The pause in the commander's movement lasted 1 second. 2 seconds. She fired. The bullet's flight time at that range was roughly 1.3 seconds. An eternity in combat. Time enough for the wind to shift. Time enough for the target to move. Time enough for 1,000 variables to make the difference between a hit and a miss. Through the scope, Arya saw the commander suddenly jerk backward. He collapsed, his bodyguards scrambling to his position. The shouted commands that had been echoing across the valley abruptly ceased. In the sudden relative quiet, the sound of helicopters became audible in the distance. The UH-60 Blackhawk helicopters came in low and fast, their door gunners already engaging targets as they approached. But they were still 3 minutes out, 3 minutes that might as well have been 3 hours given the tactical situation. In the gorge, Commander Harrison heard the rotors and felt the first glimmer of hope in over an hour. But hope didn't change the immediate reality. The enemy was disorganized, but still numerous, still surrounding their position, and still capable of preventing extraction if they regrouped. Prepare for mobile defense, Harrison ordered. When those birds get here, we need to reach them. Fighting withdrawal to the extraction point. Wounded move first, everyone else provides cover. The mystery sniper was still firing. Harrison could hear the distant cracks of precision shots, could see enemy fighters falling or taking cover. Whoever was up there was giving them a chance. Ghost Actual, a voice, suddenly crackled through the static on Harrison's radio. The jamming was breaking down as enemy positions were eliminated. This is Reaper 6-1. Inbound your position. AT at 2 minutes? Be advised, we have fast movers on station, if you can mark targets. Harrison grabbed his radio. Reaper 6-1, Ghost Actual. We are in a horseshoe-shaped gorge taking fire from 3 sides. Friendly forces only at the gorge floor. Anything above us is hostile. Copy that, Ghost. Starting our run now. The Blackhawks thundered over the ridgeline, and suddenly the battlefield transformed. Dr. mounted M240 machine guns opened fire tracers, arcsing into enemy positions. The helicopters couldn't land in the confined space, but their presence alone changed the tactical equation. Arya watched the helicopters arrive and felt something release in her chest. They'd made it. The SEALs were going to survive. But the extraction wasn't finished yet. She could see enemy fighters repositioning, preparing to engage the helicopters. An RPG team was setting up on the northern ridge with a clear shot at the aircraft. She swung her rifle toward them. Range 673 meters. The RPG gunner was lining up his shot. No time for careful aiming. Arya placed the crosshairs and fired. The RPG gunner dropped. His weapon clattered down the rocks. The loader grabbed for it, and Arya fired again. The loader fell. Another RPG team appeared on the eastern ridge. She engaged them, and another on the west. She was firing continuously now, her rifle barrel hot enough to raise blisters if touched, burning through her remaining ammunition. But it was working. The helicopters maintained their position, their door gunners suppressing enemy fighters, while ropes were thrown down to the trapped SEALs. Arya watched through her scope as the wounded went up, first hauled into the aircraft by crew chiefs. Then the others moving with tactical efficiency even in their exhaustion. Commander Harrison was the last man up, maintaining security until every one of his team was aboard. The helicopters banked hard, gaining altitude, their door gunners still firing as they climbed above effective range of ground fire. They were clear. They'd survived. Arya lowered her rifle and closed her eyes, breathing deeply for the first time in nearly an hour. Her hands were shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Her shoulders ached from the climb and from firing over 40 precision shots in rapid succession. The palms of her gloves were shredded from the cliff climb, and she could feel blood sticky against her skin. But it didn't matter. 26 men were alive who should have died in that gorge. She'd made it count. Now came the hard part, getting down. The descent took 3 hours, moving slowly in the darkness down the treacherous cliff face. By the time Arya reached the valley floor, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with approaching dawn. She was walking toward the extraction coordinates when the Black Hawk returned, landing in a clear area 200 meters ahead of her. Commander Harrison jumped down before the skids even touched ground, followed by several of his team. They saw her approaching, a small, exhausted figure covered in rock dust and blood, carrying a rifle that was still warm from firing. Harrison walked forward slowly, like he was approaching something he couldn't quite believe was real. Behind him, the other SEALs stared in equal disbelief. "You," Harrison said quietly when he was close enough. He recognized her from the mission briefing. "You're the one who—" "Lieutenant Arya Sullivan, sir. Recon element." Her voice was hoarse from dehydration and shouting into the wind during the climb. "You climbed 17B in the dark," this from Lieutenant Chen, who'd studied the topographical maps. That's not possible. Grew up climbing in Alaska, sir." Arya swayed slightly, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. "Had to do something. You were all going to die." Morrison stepped forward, and his expression was complex awe mixed with something like shame. He was one of the operators who'd used the nickname Ghost Girl with casual dismissal. "How many?" Harrison asked quietly. "Sir, how many enemy did you neutralize?" Arya thought back, counting in her head. 43 confirmed, sir. Maybe more that I couldn't verify." Stunned silence. 43 enemy fighters. Eliminated by 1 sniper. In darkness. From an impossible position. In less than an hour. "We're calling it in," Harrison said. "Every single detail goes in my after-action report." "What you did tonight?" He stopped, seemed to struggle for words. "There are no words adequate to what you did tonight, Lieutenant." Arya nodded slowly, too exhausted to process the magnitude of what she'd accomplished. "Permission to sit down, sir. The climb was rough." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the trauma of combat, the weight of what they'd all just survived, several of the SEALs actually laughed. The tension broke, and suddenly they were surrounding her, helping her to the helicopter, making sure she got water and a place to rest. As the Black Hawk lifted off, carrying them back to safety, Harrison looked at the small woman who'd saved his entire team. She was already asleep, slumped against the bulkhead, her shredded gloves still on her hands. "Ghost Girl," he murmured to himself. The nickname didn't sound like mockery anymore. It sounded like exactly what she was, a phantom warrior who appeared when needed most and disappeared into legend. The after-action review took place in a secure briefing room at Bagram Airfield 3 days later. Colonel Patricia Warren, commander of Task Force Griffin, sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by intelligence officers, tactical coordinators, and senior enlisted personnel. Commander Harrison finished his verbal report. The written version ran to 47 pages, but the verbal summary took only 20 minutes. When he finished, the room was silent. "Let me make sure I understand," Colonel Warren said slowly. Lieutenant Sullivan directly disobeyed orders to remain in position, conducted an unauthorized solo movement, climbed a cliff formation rated as non-traversable, and single-handedly engaged a numerically superior enemy force. "Yes, ma'am," Harrison said. "And by doing so, she saved the lives of every member of my team. Without her intervention, none of us would be sitting in this room." Warren turned to the intelligence officer. "Captain Rodriguez, your assessment of the enemy force." "Based on recovered equipment and surveillance data, Mom, we're estimating 230 to 250 insurgent fighters involved in the ambush. They'd been planning it for weeks. Military-grade communications, jammers, pre-positioned ammunition, caches, coordinated fire plans. It was a sophisticated operation designed to annihilate ASEAL team and create a propaganda victory, and Lieutenant Sullivan's impact on that force. 43 confirmed enemy casualties directly attributable to her engagement, ma'am. But the tactical impact went far beyond simple body count. She eliminated their sniper, multiple squad leaders, their communications coordinator, and ultimately their overall commander. The force effectively collapsed as a coherent fighting unit. Our assessment is that her intervention was the decisive factor in the battle." Warren leaned back in her chair, studying the ceiling for a long moment. Then she looked directly at Harrison. "Commander, your recommendation regarding Lieutenant Sullivan's actions." "Commendation for valor, ma'am. Silver Star at minimum. What she did went so far beyond the call of duty that I'm not sure we have adequate decorations to recognize it properly. Despite the fact that she violated direct orders." Harrison didn't hesitate. "With respect, ma'am, we give our people extensive training and trust them to make tactical decisions in the field." Lieutenant Sullivan assessed the situation, recognized that standard protocol would result in catastrophic casualties, and took action to prevent that outcome. "That's exactly what we train our special operations personnel to do." Warren nodded slowly. "Captain Howard, you were the tactical coordinator. You ordered Lieutenant Sullivan to maintain position and dismissed her tactical concerns. Your assessment now." Captain Howard's face was tight with suppressed emotion. "I made an error in judgment, ma'am. Lieutenant Sullivan identified enemy positioning that our intelligence had missed. Her warnings were accurate, and I should have heeded them. That error nearly cost 26 lives." "What's your recommendation regarding Lieutenant Sullivan?" "Full commendation, Mom. And assignment to primary sniper roles, not reconnaissance. We've been wasting her capabilities." Warren looked around the room. "Anyone disagree?" Silence. "Very well. I'll forward the commendation packet to Division." In the meantime, she pressed a button on the intercom. "Send in Lieutenant Sullivan." Aria entered the briefing room wearing a fresh uniform, her hands still bandaged from the climb. She came to attention. At ease, Lieutenant Warren said. Sit down. We need to discuss your future in this task force. Arya sat, her expression carefully neutral. She'd been expecting disciplinary action for violating orders. Let me be clear, Warren continued. What you did was tactically brilliant, personally courageous, and completely unauthorized. By every regulation in the book, I should be writing you up for disciplinary action. Yes, ma'am. However, regulations exist to serve the mission, not the other way around. Your action saved 26 lives and destroyed a sophisticated enemy operation. Commander Harrison and every member of his team are alive because of your initiative. Warren slid a folder across the table. This is your new assignment. Primary Sniper, Direct Action Team. No more reconnaissance backwater postings. You've demonstrated capabilities that this task force needs in frontline operations. Arya opened the folder, scanned the assignment orders, and looked up in surprise. Ma'am, this is a Tier 1 position. Yes. And you earned it. The question is whether you want it. These assignments are voluntary. High risk, high operational tempo. If you'd prefer to, I accept, Mom. Warren smiled slightly. I thought you might. Dismissed, Lieutenant. Your new team leader will contact you tomorrow. Arya stood, came to attention, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Harrison spoke. Sullivan. She turned back. Thank you, Harrison said simply. Behind him, several other SEALs who'd been part of his team nodded agreement. Arya's expression finally cracked just slightly. Just doing my job, sir. No, Harrison said quietly. What you did went far beyond any job description. You gave us our lives back. We won't forget that. As Arya left the briefing room, Colonel Warren turned to her assembled staff. Make sure this gets properly documented. We need this engagement in our tactical training curricula. And I want Lieutenant Sullivan's climbing approach analyzed and incorporated into our mountain warfare protocols. Already in progress, ma'am, the operations officer confirmed. Warren nodded. Good. One more thing, I want it made very clear throughout this task force that operational capability has nothing to do with physical size, gender, or volume of personality. We judge people on performance. Lieutenant Sullivan just set a very high standard for performance. I expect everyone to take note. News traveled through military communities the way fire travels through dry grass quickly and with growing intensity. Within a week, every special operations unit in Afghanistan knew the broad strokes of what had happened in Kunar Valley. The specifics remained classified, but the essence of the story spread. A single sniper operating alone from an impossible position had saved an entire SEAL team from annihilation. The nickname Ghost Girl took on an entirely new meaning. What had been mockery became mythology. Sullivan became the ghost, a phantom warrior who appeared when needed most. For Arya herself, the aftermath was complicated. She received the Silver Star in a ceremony attended by senior officers from 3 different Special Operations Commands. The citation was necessarily vague about operational details, but clear about the outcome: extraordinary heroism in combat against numerically superior enemy forces. Her grandfather couldn't attend. Civilian access to forward operating bases was obviously restricted, but she spoke with him via satellite phone the night after the ceremony. You climbed a cliff in combat, William Sullivan said, his voice amused despite the gravity of the situation. You know what this means, don't you? What, Grandpa? Means I trained you right. Means you remembered what matters. Not the recognition. Not the fame. Just doing what needs to be done when it needs doing. I was scared the whole time, Arya admitted. Thought I was gonna fall. Being scared is fine. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's what courage actually is. I'm proud of you, little one. After the call, Arya sat alone on the roof of her quarters looking out across the Afghan landscape. The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered most was that 26 men had gone home to their families instead of going home in flag-draped coffins. Her new assignment put her on a direct action team conducting high-risk missions across eastern Afghanistan. The operators she now worked alongside treated her with respect that had been absent in her previous assignments. They'd read the after-action reports. They knew what she could do. The first mission with her new team was a raid on a compound believed to house a weapons cache. Arya was positioned on overwatch, providing security for the assault element. As the team prepared to breach, the team leader's voice came through her earpiece. "Ghost, you have eyes on." "Affirm," Arya replied, scanning sectors through her scope. "All clear on approach vectors." "Copy." "Execute on your mark." It was a small thing, giving her the authority to call the timing of the assault based on her sniper's perspective. But it represented a fundamental shift. She was trusted. She was valued. She was an integral part of the team. The mission went perfectly. No casualties. Objectives achieved. And afterward, as the team gathered for debrief, the team leader, a grizzled Master Chief named Derek Nash, pulled Arya aside. "Good work tonight, Ghost. Your callouts on enemy positions were spot on." "Thank you, Master Chief. I read your file." Kunar Valley. That was some John Wayne stuff. He paused. "But here's the thing, I don't care about legend or reputation. I care about whether my people can do the job. You proved you can. Now prove you can do it consistently. That's what makes the difference between a lucky shot and a true operator." Arya nodded. "Understood, Master Chief." "Good. You're on the rotation for the next 3 operations. Get some rest." Over the following months, Arya deployed on 17 combat operations. Not all were dramatic. Most were methodical, professional military work, establishing overwatch positions, providing security, occasionally engaging enemy forces at long range. But word spread. Other units requested her by name for operations requiring precision sniper support. Her reputation wasn't built on a single dramatic action anymore. It was built on consistent professional excellence. The teenager who'd been dismissed as too quiet and too small had become one of the most respected snipers in the theater. 14 months after Kunar Valley, Arya found herself back at Forward Operating Base Chapman for a brief reset between deployments. She was sitting in the chow hall eating alone, as was her preference, when Commander Harrison sat down across from her. He was scheduled to rotate home in a week. "Mind if I join you, Lieutenant?" "Of course not, sir." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Harrison spoke. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Arya considered the question. "Honestly, sir, I was thinking that following orders meant watching 26 people die. And I couldn't do that." "Weren't you scared?" "Terrified. Every meter of that climb, I thought I was going to fall. And during the shooting, I was sure someone would spot me and put a rocket through my position." She smiled slightly. "Being scared doesn't really matter, though. What matters is whether you let the fear stop you." Harrison nodded slowly. "You know what the hardest part of command is? It's trusting your people to make the right decision when you can't tell them what to do. That night you made a decision I couldn't have ordered you to make. Hell, I probably would have ordered you not to if I'd known what you were planning. You'd have been right to, sir. It was a terrible plan with awful odds. But it was the only plan that had any chance of working. Harrison pushed his tray aside. I'm putting you in for promotion. Captain's bars. You've earned them 10 times over. Sir, I don't need. It's not about what you need. It's about properly recognizing capability and leadership. You're one of the best tactical thinkers I've ever worked with. That should come with appropriate rank and responsibility. After Harrison left, Arya finished her meal and walked outside into the cool evening air. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of being dismissed and underestimated. The training that had sometimes felt pointless. The quiet persistence in the face of casual disrespect. All of it had led to one night in Kunar Valley. One night when being underestimated became an advantage. When being too quiet meant moving undetected. When growing up in Alaska made the difference between impossible and merely terrifying. Her radio crackled. Ghost, this is operations. We need you for a briefing. Possible missions spinning up need your assessment on approach routes. Copy operations. On my way. Arya started toward the operations center, her boots crunching on the gravel. Above her, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere back in Alaska, her grandfather was probably sitting on his porch, looking at those same stars, satisfied that the lessons he'd taught his granddaughter had taken root and grown into something remarkable. She thought about the words he'd repeated so often, make it count. She'd made it count in Kunar Valley. The nickname Ghost no longer felt like an insult. It felt like exactly who she was meant to be, a warrior who moved through shadows, who appeared when needed, who did the impossible work that kept others alive. As she entered the operations center ready for whatever mission came next, Arya Sullivan allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the quietest voices carried the furthest. Sometimes the smallest warriors cast the longest shadows. And sometimes the person everyone underestimated turned out to be exactly the hero the moment required.